Chapter 18, Alice in Wonderland. David Icke wrote a fascinating book about 9/11 in 2002 entitled Alice in Wonderland and the World Trade Center Disaster, and here are some telling quotes from his work before the event that was 9/11. The plan is to engineer events, real and staged, that will create enormous fear in the countdown years to 2012. This includes a plan to start a third world war either by stimulating the Muslim world into a holy war against the West or by using the Chinese to cause global conflict, maybe both. This is a quote from The Biggest Secret 1998. Powell, like the Bushes and Cheney, is bloodline, and that's why he is to be the new Secretary of State. Given that line-up and their mentality and agenda, don't be at all surprised if the United States finds itself in another manipulated war during this administration. You will see monsters being created in the public mind to justify such action. This is a quote from the David Icke website, written on the 20th of January, 2001. Here are some snippets about 9/11 from his book. Mark Bernbach, an employee of Fox Television, was close to the World Trade Center when Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower, but he told WCBS in a live interview from the scene that it definitely did not look like a commercial plane. There was a blue logo on the front of the plane, he said. I did not see any windows on the side. It was not a normal plane that I've seen at the airport. The interview was never repeated. Icke also comments on page 307 that attacking the WTC does not affect the elite that control the United States, except in positively advancing their agenda. He also comments that they targeted the side of the Pentagon that was furthest away from the offices of the Defense Secretary, the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the other leaders of the U.S. military. This was backed up by CBS News on November 28, 2001, when they stated that in an astonishing stroke of luck, the terrorists had hit the only section of the Pentagon designed to resist a terrorist attack. Wow, that was lucky. Icke also comments that the former chief of German domestic intelligence was quoted by the American Free Press as saying that the magnitude of the planning and the deathly precision could not have been achieved without support from a state intelligence organization. A spy named Mike Freeland warned from a Canadian prison cell only a month before 9/11 that the attacks were going to happen. He was a U.S. Naval intelligence operative that passed a note to prison guards listing potential targets including the WTC, the White House and the Pentagon. The note also said, "Let one happen, stop the rest." Further questioning of Freeland included the following exchange: Q. Does that statement imply that the United States or some other intelligence agency had achieved complete penetration of the terrorist cells? A. That goes without question. Sometimes certain governments create networks like Al-Qaeda, which was really the government in Afghanistan. Those entities create specific problems at the creating government's direction. Later in the book, Icke mentions Operation Northwoods, which was a plan by the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff to organize terrorist attacks against their own people 40 years ago, that were to be blamed on Castro to justify an invasion of Cuba. The plan involved civilians being shot, planes being hijacked, boats being sunk, terrorist acts in U.S. cities and the innocent being blamed. He also states further on in the book, with the experiences given from experts in the aviation industry, that it is incredibly easy to remote control a commercial airliner. We see this done now with military drones, and some of the required software has been around since the 1980s. To remotely control any commercial airliner, all you need to do is get control of the flight management system computers and override the ability of pilots to have an input. Do that and you can fly a plane wherever you like with the pilots in the cockpit unable to do anything about it. You can also turn the transponder off and control the entire system, including blocking the pilot's ability to send a normal hijacking alarm code. Interestingly, he also writes about the technology being referred to as home run, and that in the early 1990s, Lufthansa decided against it. As long ago as the early 90s, Lufthansa acquired the info and was alarmed that one of its own aircraft might be rescued by the Americans without its authority. Accordingly, they stripped the flight control computers out of their entire fleet and replaced them with a homegrown version. These aircraft are now impregnable to penetration by home run, but that is more than can be said for the American aircraft fleet. Having worked psychically in my recent past, I also found this information to be of interest from David. I contacted a professional psychic in the United States by the name of Monica Sepulveda and asked her if she could make contact with anyone that had died during 9/11. She in turn said that she could see an explosion at the Pentagon but no plane, and similarly when the event took place I remember a reporter talking to a female eyewitness who told him that, also, there was no plane, but that she was told by officials to say that there was a plane. The psychic was able to make contact with a person named Mohammed Atta, and this was the information that she received. Wow, you know what? He's not happy at all with what's happening with him. He doesn't seem to be a happy man about his crossing. There's something about lies. Okay, he's making it a little clearer to me. I'm going to use an example because I know you'll understand it. You know how you have members of Freemasons and they have different degrees. That's how he's explaining it. It's like people at the bottom don't know everything and they are not privy to knowing what's on the top. That's how I'm getting it from him. He thought it was under the guise of one thing but it's actually something else. So it's big. He says you're already on the right track about knowing the answer. You already know the answer. It has to do with the reduction of population, an excuse. He says it's an excuse. Whatever that means. It's an excuse. Control. Excuse for control. But reduction of population, I wonder why that would be. Here is an interesting quote from Hitler that I had to include because all those years ago, it still echoes today. The masses indulge in petty falsehoods every day, but it would never come into their heads to fabricate colossal untruths, and they are not able to believe in the possibility of such monstrous effrontery. The bigger the lie, therefore, the more likely it is to be believed. Besides, even the most insolent lie always leaves traces behind it, even after it has been nailed down. Here is Icke's conclusion about 9/11, and he provides such compelling evidence in his book that it's hard not to conclude that the terrorist event on that day was manufactured as a key event or turning point that led to the next stages of international security and invasions of privacy in the supposed war on terrorism. The official fairy story has been compiled from blatant lies and evidence that was so obviously planted and manufactured. The Bin Laden confession tape is but one example. There was also the hijacker's passport found near the WTC, Mohammed Atta's letter and baggage that somehow failed to make it onto Flight 11, etc. The UK Guardian reported that journalists had described how they were directed to buildings in Kabul and other locations in Afghanistan to find apparent proof of Al-Qaeda's involvement in the hijackings. This included new box cutters still in packaging and a page torn from a magazine about flying schools in Florida. It is quite a statement about the current mental, emotional and spiritual state of the human family when you consider the basis on which those thousands of Afghan men, women and children were slaughtered by the mentally deranged terrorists and cowards running the United States and British governments and their military. No evidence worthy of a court of justice was produced to prove that Osama bin Laden and the Taliban were involved in the attacks. Not one of the alleged hijackers was an Afghan or has been connected to the Afghan people. and some 7 of the hijackers named by the FBI were found to be still alive anyway. Their target, bin Laden, has been a CIA asset and stewed for 20 years, and the Taliban were funded, armed and manipulated into power by the CIA, Pakistan intelligence and the Saudi royal family. International terrorism does not exist. This is a quote from General Leonid Ivashov, Chief of Staff of Russian Armed Forces when 9/11 took place.